real meaning behind dry text. It starts with one word, okay. Sure. Cool. Suddenly, the person who used to send long messages, ask questions, and keep conversations alive now responds with the emotional energy of a brick wall. And just like that, your mind begins racing. Are they losing interest? Did I say something wrong? Are they talking to someone else? Is the relationship changing? If you've ever stared at a dry text and felt your stomach drop, you're not alone. The truth is that dry texts have become one of the biggest sources of anxiety in modern dating. People spend hours analyzing messages that take seconds to send. They zoom in on punctuation. They study emojis. They compare today's conversation to last week's conversation. They search for hidden meanings inside every short reply. But here's what most people get wrong. A dry text does not always mean a dry feeling. Sometimes a short message is just a short message. The real challenge is knowing the difference between temporary low effort and a meaningful change in behavior. That's where most people become trapped. They don't react to what is actually happening. They react to what they fear might be happening. Imagine this. A man who normally sends detailed messages suddenly replies with, "Sounds good." Immediately, many women begin creating stories. Maybe he's bored. Maybe he's losing attraction. Maybe he's pulling away. But reality is often less dramatic. Maybe he's at work. Maybe he's stressed. Maybe he's distracted. Maybe he simply isn't in a texting mood. The problem with texting is that it removes tone, facial expressions, body language, and context. All that's left are words. And when information is missing, the human brain fills in the gaps. Unfortunately, those gaps are usually filled with insecurity rather than logic. That's why one of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that every dry text carries a hidden message. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The key is looking at patterns instead of isolated moments. A single dry text means very little. A consistent pattern of low effort means much more. If someone sends one short reply after a busy day, that's normal. If every conversation suddenly becomes cold, disconnected, and one-sided, that's different. Patterns tell the truth that individual messages cannot. One reason dry text feels so painful is because they create uncertainty. And uncertainty is emotionally exhausting. Human beings naturally seek clarity. We want to know where we stand. We want reassurance that the connection is still there. When a conversation feels different, our brains immediately start searching for answers. The danger is that many people seek those answers through overthinking instead of observation. They focus on one message instead of the overall relationship. They focus on one conversation instead of months of behavior. Another important truth is that communication styles vary dramatically. Some people are naturally expressive through text. Others are not. Some enjoy long conversations. Others prefer talking in person. Some communicate emotions easily. Others communicate through actions rather than words. This is why comparing your communication style to someone else's often creates unnecessary anxiety. The real question isn't whether someone sends long messages. The real question is whether they consistently show effort in ways that matter. Do they make time for you? Do they follow through on plans? Do they check in? Do they show genuine interest in your life? These things reveal far more about attraction than message length ever could. However, there are times when dry texts do signal something important. Sometimes they reveal emotional distance. Sometimes they reveal declining interest. Sometimes they reveal a person slowly withdrawing from the connection. The challenge is that people rarely announce these changes directly. Instead, they appear through subtle shifts. Conversations become shorter. Questions disappear. Initiating contact becomes less frequent. Enthusiasm fades. Effort decreases. This is why emotional awareness matters so much. You don't need to become paranoid about every message, but you also shouldn't ignore obvious changes in behavior. Healthy relationships are built on consistency. When consistency disappears, paying attention becomes important. One of the biggest reasons people become obsessed with dry text is because they attach their self-worth to someone else's communication. When the replies are enthusiastic, they feel valued. When the replies are short, they feel rejected. These creative person and woman culture with confidence rises and falls based on notifications. That's a dangerous way to live because your emotional state becomes dependent on factors you cannot control. A delayed reply ruins your mood. A short message creates anxiety. A missing emoji feels like a relationship crisis. Over time, this level of emotional dependence becomes exhausting. Real confidence works differently. Real confidence allows you to notice changes without immediately questioning your value. It allows you to observe behavior without turning every interaction into a reflection of your worth. Another uncomfortable truth is that some people use texting as a source of validation rather than connection. They enjoy attention when they're bored, lonely, or seeking entertainment. But when life becomes busy or their priorities shift, their effort disappears. This creates confusing mixed signals because their interest was never consistent to begin with. One day they're fully engaged, the next day they're emotionally unavailable. The result is a cycle of hope and disappointment that keeps people emotionally attached far longer than they should be. That's why actions matter more than messages. A person can send beautiful text and still be unreliable. A person can send short texts and still care deeply. Behavior always reveals more than words alone. The healthiest relationships are not built on constant texting. They're built on trust, mutual effort, and emotional security. People who feel secure don't spend every day analyzing messages. They focus on the overall connection. They pay attention to how they feel over time. They notice whether effort is balanced. They evaluate consistency rather than individual moments. Most importantly, they don't chase clarity from people who repeatedly create confusion. If someone genuinely values you, their actions will usually make that clear. Not perfectly, not every day, but consistently enough that you don't spend your life decoding every message. So the next time you receive a dry text, resist the urge to immediately panic. Don't assume the worst. Don't create stories. Don't turn one message into a relationship verdict. Instead, zoom out, look at the bigger picture. Look at the pattern, look at the effort. Because the real meaning behind dry text is rarely found in a single word. It's found in the behavior that surrounds it. And once you learn to focus on patterns instead of panic, you'll stop overthinking every message and start seeing relationships much more clearly. And this is where many people accidentally sabotage their own peace. They receive one dry text and immediately begin searching for certainty. They reread old conversations. They compare response times. They check social media activity. They look for evidence that confirms their fears. But the more emotionally invested you become in decoding every message, the harder it becomes to see reality objectively. Instead of observing what is happening, you start reacting to what you imagine might be happening. And imagination is rarely kind when emotions are involved. Think about how often people say, "He used to text me differently." While that observation may be true, the real question is why. Sometimes the answer is serious. Sometimes it isn't. Relationships naturally move through different phases. The beginning often contains intense excitement. People text constantly. Conversations last for hours. Every notification feels exciting. And eventually, life settles in, responsibilities return. Comfort replaces novelty. The communication may become less intense without becoming less meaningful. That's why intensity and interest not always the same thing.
Many people confuse the two. Another important thing to understand is that attraction is not measured by texting frequency alone. Some of the strongest relationships in the world are built between people who are busy, independent, and not glued to their phones all day. What matters is not whether someone sends 20 messages or 200. What matters is whether their behavior consistently communicates care, respect, and effort. A person can send long paragraphs every day and still be emotionally unavailable. Another person can send shorter messages while consistently showing up, keeping promises, and investing in the relationship. Which one would you trust more? One reason dry text creates so much anxiety is because they trigger fear of rejection. Deep down, many people are not actually worried about the message itself. They're worried about what the message might mean. They fear losing the connection. They fear being replaced. They fear discovering that their feelings are stronger than the other person's feelings. These fears are understandable, but they can also distort reality. When fear takes control, every short reply becomes evidence of abandonment. Every delay becomes proof of disinterest. Every conversation becomes a test of your value. That's an exhausting way to experience relationships.